Hi everyone. Thank you for joining the stream. Welcome to the stream, guys. Today we're diving deep into one of the most critical and controversial discussions happening right now. Russia's ongoing propaganda campaign, diplomacy, and Ukraine's fight for survival. Again, thank you for joining the stream. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to my subscribers. And yeah, we are, as you may have seen, Vladimir Medinsky. So this guy you see on the image now. So he's Russia's chief negotiator and a close Putin ally. Who he has been making claims about Ukraine, the West, and global politics. And his recent interview is packed with manipulations, half truths, and strategic disinformation, and it's all designed to shift the narrative. But today, we're here to do one thing: break it down, expose the tactics, and reveal the truth. Um, thank you. Thank you for joining. Uh, why this matters? We are at a crossroads where misinformation shapes opinions, diplomacy is weaponized, and global stakes are higher than ever. As you understand, there's ongoing war in Ukraine, Russia's aggression, and you never know what happens next. So Russia claims it wants peace, but what does really mean? What does that really mean? Because during the negotiation process, they always state we want peace, and Zelensky is the problem. Zelensky is the obstacle to that, and also Trump mentioned it many times. He's frustrated with Zelensky. Well, he said, "I'm frustrated with both, with Putin and Zelensky," but you know, we all understand that at some point he'll need to decide. So, what does that really mean when Russians say that they want peace? Is it peace or forced submission? That's the question. Medinsky and other Kremlin officials try to frame the war in economic terms, distort Ukraine's struggle, and push a false equivalency between Russia's interests and those of the democratic world, right? So they're emphasizing on interests, on national interest, and they forget about international law. They forget about values. They forget about democracy, and this is really disturbing, and it's not good because it looks like Trump is also focused on the interests of the United States, and that's it. So the new administration, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, once in his interview emphasized that the United States changed their international policy. They're now moving in another direction. So they kind of forget about values. They will only emphasize and they will only be interested in the interests of the United States. That's it. So let's talk about the American connection as well. Medinsky specifically mentions Donald Trump trying to align Russian interests with Trump's America First policy. He paints US support for Ukraine as a waste, suggesting that billions are going down the drain and that the West is blindly funding conflict. But Is that really the case, guys? Is it about wasting money or protecting democratic values? Um, this isn't just about Ukraine, by the way. It's about the integrity of their international law and the future of global security and how authoritarian regimes manipulate narratives and to justify their aggression. It's about whether free nations will stand together or let dictators rewrite borders at gunpoint. And I want to hear from you, by the way, throughout the stream. I'll be watching your comments, reading your perspectives, and responding to questions. Also, there's a survey, there's a poll. Please participate. It's really interesting to know your thoughts. And what do you think about Medinsky's claims? How should Ukraine, the US, and Europe respond? Let's break it down together. Thank you for joining. Hopefully, we'll have more and more viewers and users joining our stream. Okay. So first of all, we need to understand that this is the guy, Vladimir Medinsky. This is head of Russian delegation, so top negotiator from Russia. He's Putin's assistant, and he's interviewed by Rick Sanchez, and it sounds impressive, right? American journalist interviews a Russian negotiator on some important topics, but the truth is that Rick Sanchez is a journalist that works for Russia Today, and you know that Russia Today is a part of Russian propaganda machine. But he said that he really likes working for Russia Today because he thinks that it's more independent. There's freedom of speech as compared to Fox News, for example, and other channels that he worked for in the past. It's really interesting. And the whole impression of this interview is that two guys decided to speak and to form our opinion. So it's not just an interviewer and a guest. No, the interviewer, the journalist, was very, very active during that conversation, and he made his own statements. Not just asking questions, but he really made his own statements. And that's really interesting. Okay? Now, okay, let's so what's interesting here? He said, is Russia truly committed to a good faith negotiation to find a peace deal with Ukraine? Are there any barriers, either from Putin or the Russian government, that prevent you from achieving that aim? Right? And Medinsky answered, he replied, I will say one thing, Rick, which I have never said before publicly. If Ukraine wanted peace, if Ukraine were ready, if it made its own decisions, we would have been able to sign an agreement on February 28th, 2022 during our first meeting. And the conditions then would have been much softer than we are offering today. That is very important, guys. We need to remember this phrase. The condition would have been much softer than what we are offering today. Very interesting, because later he will say just opposite. He will his point of view will change. It will be different. By and large, all we wanted was for Ukraine not to enter NATO, not to have any NATO military bases on its basis, on its territory. I told them, you can be like Austria, a beautiful, prosperous country. You can have an army like Austria. Secondly, we wanted the Russian language and the Orthodox Church to have equal rights in Ukraine. Because that's amazing. You can speak Arabic in Israel, you can speak Hebrew in Palestine, but Russian is restricted in Ukraine, he said. Even though three-fourths of the population speaks Russian, and more than half consider it their native tongue. And the third point, recognition of Crimea, because you have to admit, Crimea had one of the most democratic referendums imaginable. So that's what Medinsky said. And we need to break it down, we need to comment. So I will say one thing, Rick, which I have never said before publicly. So that's, guys, manipulation through exclusivity. He wanted to sound exclusive, right? This phrasing is a classical rhetoric tactic aimed to make the audience feel that they are receiving exclusive inside information, boosting credibility while masking misleading claims. So he wanted to add exclusivity, exclusive, right? Crimea and Donbass occupation. In 2014, Russia invaded and illegally annexed Crimea, followed by its military intervention in Lugansk and Donetsk. Then, on February 24, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion, seizing even more territory. Medinsky's claim that Russia only wanted neutrality, language rights, and church recognition ignores the broader territorial ambitions at play. Here's the summary of Russia's demands during the first round of negotiations on February 28, 2022. Neutral status for Ukraine. That's what they demanded. A formal pledge that Ukraine would not join NATO or host foreign military bases. Then, recognition of Crimea as part of Russia. Russia insisted that Ukraine legally acknowledge the annexation of Crimea. And then, demilitarization. Russia demanded significant limits on the size and capability of the Ukrainian military, reportedly suggesting a force of 85,000 troops, while Ukraine insisted on 250. Then, denazification. Yeah, you heard it right. A vague and politically changed term used by Russia to pressure Ukraine, lacking concrete definition in diplomatic terms. This means change your politicians and make your government pro-Russian, have a pro-Russian president, and just be pro-Russian. That's what they mean by denazification. Then they requested status of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Initially, Russia proposed autonomy for them within Ukraine, including the right to elect their own governors, but later suggested full independence or annexation into Russia. Language and historical policies. Russia wanted guarantees for equal rights for the Russian language and cultural recognition, although this demand became less prominent later. So, on the Ukrainian side, their core demand was the complete withdrawal of Russian forces, including from Crimea and Donbass. So, these talks lasted over 5 hours, but ended without concrete agreements. The sides merely agreed to meet again and have a second round of this conversation. Okay, so as you can see, Medinsky made a false statement. So their demands were broader. They had a long list of demands. As usually, they manipulate facts. And also, why mention Austria? Medinsky compares Ukraine to Austria, implying Ukraine should accept neutrality. However, Ukraine is a sovereign state. and has the right to decide its own foreign policy. Russia does not indicate that. Then, the Austria analogy is troubling, by the way, guys. We all remember Germany's annexation of Austria in 1938, the Anschluss. Remember that? So Medinsky's comment is a Freudian slip, revealing imperial ambitions of Russians. And Russia cannot fulfill these ambitions because Ukraine's military is too strong for them. But they tried to. They wanted to make it happen. We need to understand this reality. Now, then Sanchez says this. So says Gallup. So says Pew, two of the most respected polling organizations in the world. So continuing their thought that the referendum in Crimea was acceptable, it was legal, and you cannot doubt about it. That was a free will, etc., etc., etc. So Sanchez says they found that 85 to 93% of Crimeans believed the referendum was conducted properly and its results were accurate. I'm only quoting their findings. It's not my words, he said. Medinsky said, absolutely, it's a nation's right to self-determination. It's a basic freedom enshrined in the United Nations Charter. It's a principle that even the French fought for in the 18th century. So, head of the Russian delegations in the peace negotiations in Istanbul, Vladimir Medinsky, was interviewed by a U.S. journalist, by the way, guys. So, and that sounds impressive, but again, we need to mention he works for Russia Today, a part of the Russian propaganda machine. Speaking of the so-called Crimea referendum in 2014, before the referendum took place, Russian troops without insignia left their military base in Sevastopol and invaded the peninsula. That's what we need to understand. People were shocked and frightened. The soldiers occupied the government buildings, including parliament. Pro-Russian activists were given a green light, while pro-Ukrainian citizens were blocked, imprisoned, or even killed. Remember, at that time, Putin did not acknowledge that those were Russian soldiers. But later, he stated that it was the Russian army that helped pro-Russian activists. The referendum was held while machine guns were pointed at citizens, making it impossible to be accepted by civilized countries. So these propagandists, both of them, they claim that it was a democratic referendum, but why doesn't the United Nations recognize its results? That's the question. The American journalist conveniently forgot to mention that it was not recognized even by the United States. The OSCE and the European Union also did not send personnel and do not recognize the results of that referendum. Moreover, many Ukrainian citizens opposed the referendum and did not accept it. It was illegal under the Ukrainian constitution. According to the constitution, a referendum must be held at the national level with participation from the entire country, not just Crimea. This is really important, guys. Thank you for joining. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for being with this channel where we discuss important things. So, what about Gallup research? They mentioned, right? They did not conduct a poll, but it was after the referendum. So, sorry, they did conduct a poll, but after the referendum. Many respondents were frightened and feared for their families. When a gun is pointed at you, you may agree to things you wouldn't under normal circumstances. So, a previous survey by the International Republican Institute in May 2013 found that only 23% of Crimeans wanted to join Russia, while 53% preferred remaining in autonomous regions within Ukraine. Quite a stark contrast, isn't it? So this survey was conducted in a freer environment under a legitimate Ukrainian government with no occupying army, making its data far more credible in reflecting true sentiment. The Pew Research Center never stated that the referendum was held properly or that its results could be trusted. That claim is a manipulation. Their survey focused on Russian public opinion, showing that 84% of Russians living in Russia believed that the referendum was free and fair. However, this does not reflect the views of Crimeans themselves, nor does it confirm the credibility of the vote. So, Russia's occupation of Crimea is an international crime. Just like the occupation of other regions in Ukraine, Russia's full-scale aggression in 2022 is yet another crime. The United Nations, OSCE, European Union, and United States all refused to recognize the referendum results. The UN General Assembly passed a resolution affirming Ukraine's territorial integrity and declaring the referendum invalid. Why invoke the right to self-determination? So Medinsky said it. Self-determination. Simple. It's a manipulative argument meant to justify Russia's annexation of Crimea and Donbass. Yes, the UN Charter recognizes people's right to self-determination. But this principle originally applied to colonies breaking away from imperial rule after World War II. In this case, there is no distinct Crimean or Donbass people. They have no separate separate history, religion, or culture. They are Ukrainian citizens. Some residents have Russian origins, by the way, but ethnic background alone does not grant the right to secession. That's called separatism, right? Separatism, not self-determination. A true example of self-determination would be India separating from Britain, where Indians had a distinct culture, language, and history, and were under foreign occupation. The same applies to Pakistan and Bangladesh. And what about Russia? Russia has many ethnic minorities and regions that do not share common values, religion, or history with ethnic Russians like Chechnya and Dagestan, which were Muslim regions occupied by the Russian Empire. Chechnya tried to break away from Russia, but Moscow refused to let them go. There were two wars. Russia lost the first, but won the second, and ultimately crushed separatist movement. So, while Russia fiercely defends its own territorial integrity, it denies Ukraine the right to protect its own borders. This stance violates stance violates Ukrainian law and international law. Thank you, guys. If you want real facts, honest analysis, deep dives into today's biggest issues, hit the subscribe button and stay ahead of Russian propaganda. We need to be careful. Now, Medinsky continued. And he said, earlier we proposed that they remain part of Ukraine as an autonomous region so that they could choose their own governors. And the last item in our proposal, there were two territories in Donbass and two regions that did not want to be part of Ukraine. So people in Russia choose their own governors. I vote for the mayor of Moscow. People in the US vote for governors and mayors. But in Ukraine, the president office appoints the governors. There are no elections. Just let the people choose their own governors and they will come back. But Ukraine refused. That's what Medinsky said. So, really, Medinsky is implying that Ukraine isn't a democracy. That's a bold claim coming from a country where independent media is suppressed, opposition is silenced, the political power is tightly concentrated. Russia has no real political competition, only a handful of loyalist parties. Let's not forget, guys, Putin amended the constitution to reset presidential term limits by passing the original two-term rule. During the Medvedev years, he simply rotated roles to stay in power. That's a clear manipulation of the system. Corruption in Russia? Off the charts. And now to the Ukrainian comparison. In Russia, governors are technically elected but in practice, most are handpicked by Kremlin ahead of time. Acting governors are often installed before elections, giving them major institutional advantages. In some regions, governors are even appointed through regional parliaments from a short list provided by the president. So yes, there's voting, but true political competition is stifled. So in Ukraine, it's true that governors, heads of regional state administrations, are appointed by the president based on a cabinet submission. But this is important. Ukraine holds free and competitive elections for mayors, local councils, parliament, and the presidency. The difference is structural, not authoritarian. We need to understand that. But Russians always want to make Ukraine look worse, to make Ukraine look as a dictatorship. And by the way, did you notice that Trump also mentioned that Zelensky is a dictator? Well, Zelensky is a dictator, and then who's Putin then? Why Trump thinks that Zelensky is a dictator, not Putin? It's interesting. So, Ukraine is not a dictatorship. It has flaws like all democracies do. We have problems, but comparing it to Russia's tightly controlled political system is like, it makes no sense. So it's just a difference in the political system. Ukraine is not a dictatorship. Now, what other interesting thoughts Medinsky had? Let me. The Ukrainian side, you tell me the Russia is in a good. So that was Sanchez. The Ukrainian side, you tell me Russia is in a good faith negotiation to find a solution. Can you look at these guys that you are negotiating with and tell me that they are also negotiating in good faith, or is someone mandating what they can say and what they can't say? So that's a little bit stupid commented question. Of course, the delegations of the international meetings receive directions from their president or prime minister, and they can not decide the face of the country on their own. So literally, President Zelensky gave orders, and I think they were put in writing so that our delegation know that is what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. That's how diplomacy works. And this comment by Sanchez is targeted to people who, who want a simple solution, simple solutions of complicated things. Of course, they have directions. Of course, they had conversation with President Zelensky before. That's how it works. It works for all delegations, for all groups, for all diplomats. Now, Medinsky said, last time they were more independent and there was more freedom in their actions. And now I see that they are less independent. Really? What that reminds me of is it's like seeing a top manager hide in a huge corporation. Some decisions are up to them, but the matters of principle, whether to buy or sell the company, whether to issue new shares or enter a new market, they would need to consult with the board. So this is what I'm reminded of. They also become very nervous. They're constantly looking at each other. If it feels as if they're watching each other. Well, really? So now the Ukrainian delegation is less independent? Why is that? The answer is simple. Ukraine fully understands that Russia's goal is not negotiation, but destruction and occupation. Russia's Russia does not want peace. It wants control. That's why Ukraine is no longer willing to make concessions, right? Zelensky has made it clear. Ukraine will never recognize Russian occupation or annexation. Ukraine will not weaken its military. Ukraine will not capitulate. Moscow might frame this as stubbornness, but in reality it's self-defense. And make no mistake about it. Now we have some more comments. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Um, so Medinsky said about the 6,000 fallen soldiers, Ukrainian fallen soldiers, and he stated that Ukrainian authorities refused to accept those bodies. Why? First, it is difficult for them to acknowledge such big losses, he said. We also told them that they could use our refrigerators to reciprocate and to give us the bodies of Russian soldiers. And then he said that it's too expensive and Ukrainian government does want to make payments to the families of the fallen soldiers, etc., etc., etc. So Ukraine has already accepted over 1,000 bodies of fallen soldiers. That's a fact. So that was another propaganda from Russians. Now, the process continues. So it didn't end. Now, Russia's claim that Ukraine refuses to accept bodies is a manipulative narrative meant to mislead and paint Ukraine as dishonoring its own fallen troops. This is not true. Medinsky strategically brings up American taxpayer money, attempting to frame Ukraine as dependent on US funds. This is false. While the US provides significant military aid, 60% of financial and military assistance comes from Europe. Additionally, compensation on the families of fallen Ukrainian soldiers is paid from Ukraine's national budget, not from a special US fund, by the way. There is no designated American aid program specifically for this purpose. So that's a manipulation, no taxpayer funds. And bottom line, Russia's messaging distorts reality. Ukraine is honoring its soldiers, but the Kremlin is using emotional appeals and financial arguments to shift blame and manipulate international perceptions. And also, we need to understand that Ukraine never refused to accept bodies of fallen soldiers. Um, in reality, Russians always manipulate, and they often send the bodies of civilians, not the soldiers. And they always exaggerate the number. They always try to, convince others that they do not have losses, while the latest statistics says that they hit 1 million losses, right? 1 million soldiers dead or injured. Yeah, and that's a big number, by the way. But Medinsky said that only Ukrainian soldiers are dead, so only Ukraine has fallen soldiers, not the Russians. Well, this is impossible. That's a manipulation. So they created this agenda. They created this manipulation just to show that Ukraine is not a credible partner. Ukraine is doing something wrong. Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining. Please like this stream. Please comment. Please vote. It would be great to hear from you. Please like the stream so that other people can join, so that other people can see. Now, we are continuing our discussion. Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. So I'm not in position to give advice. I just listen to what Trump says, and his national conservatism is entirely understandable. You must do what is best for America and for Americans. The Americans feel it fits them to put all their money down the drain for Zelensky and lose trillions in possible contracts with Russia and other countries. Why? Why do you do that? Why would you lead wars that make no sense? Said Medinsky. In this regard, I would like to say that I heard the Munich speech by Vice President Vance, and it was very clearly the case of a person saying that he believes to be right. It was a very good speech. President Trump's speech shows that he only thinks about American interests, not senators' interests who think about PR or just introducing controversial bills. I used to be a parliamentary member myself, so I know that in parliament you have your own interests. But if you are head of state, if you are responsible for the country, your interests are different. You don't think about your constituencies' ideas, right? You think about the country as a whole, said Medinsky. In this regard, Trump policies are very clear to us so far, and hopefully he can resist that pressure that happens in any government. But there are people who make way too much money to allow him not to be involved in wars. Mr. Biden obviously allowed those people to run things in many ways. I believe, if you will allow me to say it, that his administration was influenced heavily. Now, I think there's a battle going on in Mr. Trump's administration. I hope it works out. I want to say one thing. I think Trump believes in God, but the previous administration did many things, said Medinsky, that one could burn in hell for. So I think Trump at night sometimes thinks about what people will fondly remember him by. He wants God to see him as a good person. He wants to be a peacemaker and a unifier, as he says, and that's a very good formula. So, Mr. Medinsky applauds Donald Trump for his so-called national conservatism, saying it's only logical to cut support for Ukraine and do what's best for Americans. But let's not be naive, guys. That isn't just about America. It's about Russia's benefit. What Medinsky really wants is America that turns its back on its allies, breaks NATO solidarity, and leaves Ukraine, and eventually other democracies defenseless. Trump's transactional view of foreign policy may appeal to authoritarians, but it's morally bankrupt when applied to genocide, mass abductions of children, the bombing of cities, and the erasure of a nation's sovereignty. Now, Medinsky says Americans are pulling all their money down the drain for Zelensky. That is an outright manipulation of facts. In reality, supporting Ukraine is one of the most cost-effective security investments in the U.S. The U.S. has made in decades. For less than 5% of the Pentagon's annual budget, we have helped prevent a broader war in Europe, degraded the military capabilities of one of the primary adversaries, and strengthened alliances like NATO. The US isn't just funding Zelensky, it's funding freedom and global stability. Well, the contract with Russia illusion. Medinsky laments that the US is losing trillions in possible contracts with Russia. Well, I have news for him. America does not do business with regimes that bomb maternity hospitals and abduct children en masse. The only contracts Russia is offering are contracts of corruption, energy dependence, and bloodshed. That's what they offer. Let's also not forget that Russia's own economy has been gutted by sanctions, not because of the West, but because of Putin's war. The Kremlin offers economic ruin, not prosperity. And we really need to understand that Russia had good relations with the European Union, even after their invasion of Crimea in 2014. Russia had good relations with the United States. Well, U.S. applied some sanctions on Russia, but those sanctions were just, they were not serious. So they felt really well. They annexed Crimea, and Europeans traded with them. And Germany had these Nord Stream pipelines with Russians, and they were okay, right? And then, after their full-scale invasion, of course, they received sanctions. Now Europeans trying to work on. Actually, they're working on the 18th package of sanctions, and hopefully it will be released soon. The American president is waiting. We don't know what he's waiting for, but he's waiting. Hopefully, their Senate will pass that bill. They will vote for that bill because they say there's a veto-proof majority. This means that President Trump cannot ban that law. So the law will return to the Senate. They will vote it again. The House of Representatives should vote for that law. But again, Trump, in that case, has no power. But we are waiting. We are waiting for Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal, right? These senators, they're going aggressive against Russia now. Now, let's talk about moral clarity. On Biden, pressure and burning in hell. Medinsky accuses the Biden administration of sins one could burn in hell for. What kind of sins he is he talking about? That's rich coming from a man defending a regime that launched a war of aggression, executed civilians in Bucha, and forcibly deported Ukrainian children to erase their identity. And he says about sins, and he says about Biden, who said that Putin is a butcher. Biden, who supported Ukraine. Well, their support was not enough, obviously. They had their own interests. They thought that Russians could go nuclear. They thought that Russians could drop a nuclear bomb or launch a nuclear rocket on Ukraine. So they wanted to avoid escalation, but they were happy that they crossed Russian red lines. So they let Ukraine hit Russian territory with the long-range missiles, right? British, French, and also American-made missiles. So Biden supported Ukraine, unlike Trump. So Ukraine is receiving aid from the United States, but it was accepted, it was confirmed when Biden was sitting, when the Biden was a president. when Biden was president. Now, Trump as a peacemaker, no, enabler of autocracy. Now, the claim that Trump is a peacemaker would be laughable if it weren't so dangerous. And that's true. Remember what Trump said: I need 24 hours to end this war. If I were the president, then this war would have even started, he said. And now he said that no one respected Biden, but everyone respected Trump. Now Trump is a president of the United States. He is involved in the negotiation process. And I don't think there's some progress. On the contrary, Russians increase the intensity of their attacks. They are shelling Ukrainian citizens, they're killing children, women, and they are launching rockets. And they say they're very, very precise, right? They choose the target and they're very precise, and they hit the target. But in this case, we all see these images and videos of destroyed buildings, destroyed cafes, right? Bars, markets. There's a lot of suffering in Ukraine because of that. And it increased after Trump declared his unconditional and immediate ceasefire. He asked Putin to start peace, right? Peace negotiations. Nothing happened. Well, of course, we had negotiations and it was good. So, prisoner exchange, and now bodies of the fallen soldiers returned to Ukraine. Ukraine accepted them. But in terms of peacekeeping, in terms of ending of the war, nothing happened. And we need to understand it. So peace doesn't mean letting dictators redraw borders by force. That's appeasement. This is called appeasement. Peace is not appeasement. And we know from history where that road leads. We know. So this is not about left or right. It's not about right and wrong. This is about Democrats versus. This isn't about Democrats and versus Republicans. Many brave conservatives like Liz Cheney, Adam Kissinger, and others have stood for Ukraine because they understand the stakes. This is about truth versus lies, freedom versus tyranny, the values of the democratic world versus the moral void of the Kremlin. Ukraine doesn't need lectures from propagandists, right? It needs weapons, aid, and unwavering support until victory. Because when Ukraine wins, democracy wins. Thank you. Thank you guys for joining this stream. See you next time. Bye.